What I have found in my experience when I speak to architectural firms or GCs or developers is they are taking just a small portion of the entire construction process and making those comparisons. So they're comparing product to product.
What if the real value of mass timber had nothing to do with carbon and everything to do with cost avoidance, site performance, and strategic decision making? Today's guest, Scott Charney, is the mass timber market leader with Quality Buildings, offering full turnkey mass timber supply and installation services. As a fellow military veteran, Scott approaches mass timber like a mission, with a deep focus on sequencing, site logistics, and what actually moves the financial needle for GCs and developers. In this episode, we break down the less obvious, but more impactful, benefits of mass timber that are too often overlooked in basic material comparisons. Scott walks us through why lighter structures translate into smarter, cheaper foundations, the labor and logistics advantages that come from swinging panels with just 4 people instead of 30, and how tighter crews, quieter sites, and faster installs can lead to lower risk, cleaner jobs, and less disruption for complex environments. We'll also dig into the big but question that kills timelines and how Scott's team solves it with sequencing, upfront collaboration, and process playbooks. If you've ever had to convince a skeptical CFO, GC, or developer on how mass timber pencils, this one's for you. And before we dive in, the early bird pricing for the Mass Timber Group Summit is ending soon. The best projects start with the right conversations and the right people. That's exactly what you'll find in Denver. The sharpest minds in mass timber, all in one place. You can use code PODCAST, all caps, at masstimber.group to save $50 on your ticket. And don't wait, these early bird pricings are ending soon and it will sell out. So with that, let's get into it.
Hey, good day. Scott Charney here with Quality Buildings. We have been in business since about 2008. The leadership is of Amish heritage. We're based in Lancaster County. So what that means is, if anyone knows anything about the Amish in Lancaster County especially, they're craftsmen first and foremost. So our owner was raising barns at 10 years old. So that's where that came from. He moved into, as a young man, moved into doing timber frame, equestrian buildings, home additions. That moved into framing, rough framing houses. And then he decided that panelized was the way to go. So he started a panelized company. So we have panelized wood walls that we distribute throughout the mid-Atlantic. And we also have turnkey mass timber. That's the division I lead. I come from a construction background as well. Everything from fences and decks to rough framing homes to renovating kitchens to working with timber frame, actually. I worked with a timber framer for about 6-7 months in my career. So I came on board about 2 years ago here. My technical background is military, like Nick and Brady. I was with the military intel, so my approach and my wiring is such that I approach everything from a business intel standpoint. Um, just tell me the mission and what the rules of engagement are, and let me go. So came on board with Quality about 2 years ago, and we've seen some great activity in those 2 years, some great growth as well, and happy to be back in the construction industry, especially with something I love greatly.
Yeah, well, we're super excited to talk to you, Scott. We've kind of talked a little bit in preparation to this podcast about how can we frame this conversation so it's not just a, hey, mass timber can be faster. Hey, mass timber is green, right? We want to kind of like get more back into like, why is mass timber a strategic business choice? And so I think the way we're going to kind of tee up this conversation is a little bit more about on the benefits of mass timber that people aren't considering because maybe they're not so obvious, right? And then how do we take mass timber and bring it more into like an apples to apples comparison with other structural materials? And kind of on your Intel strategic approach decision, when we're talking about mass timber, how do you think that we should be positioning it as a strategic business decision rather than say merely like an environmental choice? Like what's your approach there?
Yeah, that's a great question. we are fortunate to have done a diverse amount of projects. So I get to be in touch with a lot of different architects designing different buildings, different GCs that have a different approach, as well as developers for specific reasons for why they want to build. We did an office project in Baltimore. It was on a brownfield. Um, so what happens was a lot of developers passed up this property because they figured if they had to build an office building or something on it, they would have to build a pretty heavy foundation on this to overcome the volatile soils that were there. Well, this developer had a little more savvy. He knew about mass timber being a lighter construction method. So he bought the property for 75 cents on the dollar, right? Picked it up relatively inexpensively, uh, put a foundation, a concrete podium, and then 3 stories of mass timber, and has a successful building that has won, I think, to date, about 5 different awards for architectural design, for sustainability, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the tenants that moved in there just won an interior design award for fitting his office out. So there's an example of a strategic move by a developer that was in the know and that had some savvy about mass timber being a lighter construction method, took advantage of an inexpensive property that he could build on and make his pro forma work.
And so I guess maybe we can start with using that example as kind of a touchstone and maybe start with like the elephant question in the room. So it's like you have this structural material that we refer to as mass timber, but everybody says it's more expensive. How do we kind of debunk that myth or address the premium that comes with mass timber in other ways so that it is not as much as most people perceive it to be?
Sure. First, I'm going to say it's worth it. And secondarily, what I have found in my experience when I speak to architecture firms or GCs or developers is they are taking just a small portion of the entire construction process and making those comparisons. So they're comparing product to product. It's more of a systems approach, a holistic approach. I kind of make the analogy, you know, how many people build roofing systems with rafters anymore? Very rare, right? They're using trusses because it's prefabricated. It makes it a lot easier. It's already pre-engineered, so on and so forth. Same way with floor trusses. Very few builders are putting floor joists 2x12s across the span. They're using, floor trusses for that. I had an opportunity to work with Superior Walls foundation systems in my career. Um, there's a prefabricated foundation wall that, greatly expedites projects. It's already built in, just like, Prego spaghetti sauce. It's in there, right? It was already 5,000 PSI. The rebar was built into it. Insulation was built into it. So it was pretty much a no-brainer that you could schedule because it was prefabricated. Same with mass timber. Mass timber is a grandchild of timber frame, right? It's an upgraded model, pre-engineered, prefab, as everyone knows, comes on site and you're putting together a kit, you're putting together a puzzle. Where the magic comes in is on the front end, where all the design's done. Reeling it back to, yes, more expensive. Well, let's talk about the deducts, the things that you don't have to do on site to make it affordable, to make it level out, if you will, on a fair playing field, right? So, I mean, a lot of the audience that you have on this podcast is going to understand some of these things, right? You put a CLT panel, you already have your ceiling. You don't have to drywall the ceiling. You don't have to paint the ceiling, right? So there's 2 trades you don't have to use in that application. More importantly, let's think about the project site. So, spoke to a developer that had a project in Washington, D.C. It was an overbuild project. I did a hard hat tour. It was the 80M project, if you're familiar with that. So my understanding after speaking to them, he wanted to build a couple more stories onto his existing building, had his foundation checked. He couldn't do it because it wouldn't withstand the weight of concrete and steel. So he pivoted to mass timber. You can pull it up. Eventually, he built a fantastic building. And when I spoke to him at the Hard Hat tour, I asked him, how much faster was this than traditional building? And in his words, he said 50%. And I questioned it because there was a lot of people in the room and some noise going on. I said, 15%? And he said, no, 50% faster. And then here was the bonus. He added to that, and it was quieter. And I said, talk to me about quieter. And he said, as he was putting this together and putting the permitting together, he got a lot of pushback from the neighborhood that it was going to be really loud. It was going to be disruptive. There was going to be all kinds of steel clanging. There's going to be cement trucks on board. There's going to be nail guns going off. And it was going to go on for a long time. Plus, they were concerned about, we're not going to have parking because all these construction workers are going to have all their vehicles on the road. There's going to be dust everywhere. And he said, no, no, no. This is going to be mass timber. It's going to come in a matter of weeks. These 3 stories, 4 stories, whatever you put on top are going to be up. And you're not going to hear nail guns. There's going to be screw guns, certainly. There's only going to be a few vehicles because the mass timber crew is 9 people, not 35. There's only going to be 4 vehicles, not 17, not 20. So holistically, as a system, as a developer, as a GC that's having to coordinate multiple trades, some of those things you don't have to do make it a net proposition at the end of the project. So I think the error that's being made is that it's being looked at as a product to product. It doesn't compare product to product. It really doesn't on many levels that we don't have enough time for here. But on the constructability of the system and the entire project holistically, front to back end, it makes a ton of sense. And that's just a few examples. I mean, some of the examples the developers and GCs have told me, of course, is the accuracy. It's a machine product. We installed some elevator shafts. GC said it was within a 32nd of an inch. He also added, and this is that added bonus, he added in it was a clean site. He said the only trash was the covering that came when it was on the flatbed. He said it didn't have to haul any trash away. There's no debris that my workers had to work around anywhere. So as a PM, as a GC, all those things add up if you have to deal with them on site. If there's a lot of trash, you have to haul trash, you have to hire somebody to put it, you have to get a bobcat to load it. Not so much with mass timber. So a lot of those kind of items that people don't think about that are still part of the constructability of it is what make it pencil and what make it, I think, an advantage versus a disadvantage.
Okay, so Scott, I'm gonna unpack some of those things that you just talked about a little bit. So I
Yeah.
heard about site cleanliness, noise reduction, labor reduction, foundational savings, etc. I'm gonna ask you kind of like one by one. We're gonna go through those things. So, like, let's start with like the foundational requirements and perhaps
Yeah.
reductions, rather that cost avoidance side of things on maybe the ADM project or another one. Because mass timber is lighter, like what are some of the actual metrics that we're seeing on like reduced foundational requirements?
Yeah, I don't know that I can give you specific metrics. Obviously, mass timber is far lighter than concrete and steel, um, and it's a case by case basis. Typically, I mentioned the office project. Obviously, it was a brownfield. He had civil engineers come out and do the evaluation to figure out what kind of foundation would have to go in there, spreader, foundation, so on and so forth. I will note that the civil engineer working on that office project moved their headquarters into that building after it was done because they liked it so much. That's just a caveat. Um, but the lighter foundation is a case by case basis, depending on where it is, of course, depending on soil capacity, loads that it has to carry, so on and so forth. Um, I can't give you exacts. I'm not going to try to bamboozle either. But in that instance, it worked for them. On the 80M, obviously it worked for him with an existing foundation. What he couldn't do with concrete and steel as an ad, he could do with mass timber. So it gave him an advantage, gave him an alternative that he didn't know that he had.
No, and I appreciate you just being like honest about not being able to like quantify those metrics across the board because everything's going to be different. But I can imagine, and I'm not a structural guy, but especially when you're talking about that overbuild project, obviously the foundation is already in existence, right? But it's like, what can you do on top of that existing building with perhaps less or minimal reinforcement? So we've seen projects, yeah, where it's like, hey, we were going to do an overbuild on this. We could only get 2 stories with concrete and steel because of the weight. But if we went mass timber, we actually got 3. So that's kind of things that we're talking about here, right?
Exactly. And as a developer, if that third story adds 10 more apartments at 2,000 a month, not a bad gig. And build that into your cost comparison. So it's the net. What does mass timber allow for that you couldn't do with other materials?
We're hearing a lot about labor shortages across construction. How does that fit into mass timber prefabrication's approach, like solving workforce challenges? What does that mean for a project's bottom line?
Sure, that I will. I'll give you an example. Um, on that office project, I did a 360 with the architect, which was Mosley, great architecture firm out of Baltimore. And I always ask the questions: what surprised you, and what didn't surprise you? And since this was a new project to them, they said what surprised them the most was watching our guys, 4 guys, swing a lot of dowel laminated timber and how much they got done in such little time with 4 people. And I said, that would be compared to what? And I remember her saying, seeing 30 people running around with nail guns and 2x4s all over the place. And it looked like one of those time lapse videos. She said, but we just stood there for an hour watching in 4 hours how much 4 of your guys got done on the floor. And we just couldn't believe how much was accomplished. On Princeton, it was the same kind of feedback from some of the developers at Princeton that were working on it. I asked them what surprised them, and they said the speed. Princeton was a different project, much different because there was a lot of repeatable pieces on that one. So they said, we came in the morning with our coffee, got into the office, came out at lunchtime, and we couldn't believe how much was accomplished over the long haul that was done during that day. That helps the trades move in faster, right? Once the floor is done, trades moving in faster. So the speed was a factor for them as well. Again, case by case basis, repeatable items on the project, but that's something that you try to design into it in the very front end. How many of these can be repeatable? What's the grid look like that we can optimize this project for you?
And going back to like kind of the theme of what we're talking about here, like cost avoidance. So obviously fewer guys on site, fewer paychecks, right? Fewer man hour laborers. What are what would be other costs associated with having, let's say, 4 guys versus 30 that might not be like readily apparent when people are looking at, oh, it's just man hour labor saved. What else wraps around having reduced guys on site?
Yeah, communication. I mean, if you're a project manager and you're having your morning meetings and you have 30 people that you have to uh, relay information to, that have to, first of all, listen to it, hear it, abide by it, understand it, versus a crew of 4 or 5, which is much more intimate and specialized, if you will. Um, the communication is much more direct and much more collaborative than it is speaking, what do you call it, down the street, down the pike, kicking the can down the road. Um, So that would be a big one for me, is the communication, because you're working with a much smaller, tighter group. Sorry, I'm going to reference a military thing. Navy SEAL teams are much more efficient than a platoon going after something.
Yeah.
So
No, that's a great reference. And I think what I'm hearing a little bit too is it's not just communication or miscommunication opportunities, right, with a bigger crew. But I think it also probably falls more on like your PMs, your superintendents. It's like more surety of like a reduced, chain of command, if you will, sticking with the military theme, right? So it's like, these guys might be working on one project, they might be working on 4 projects, planning, execution, wrap up, et cetera. So it's like it's less tasks that fall in their bucket with like a more consolidated, condensed crew. Has that been your guys' experience?
absolutely, and like you said, the coordination factor. It's harder to steer a large ship to change direction if you need to change direction, but if you're in a kayak, you can pretty much be pretty agile.
One of the biggest things out there is weather and rain, because we all know that water is the arch nemesis of timber over time. And if it's not protected, I mean, it's not just going to decay right in front of you, it can get washed off, but there's a lot of staining, there's a lot of things that can happen if it's not appropriately taken care of. So, I mean, these can be budget killers that most people don't really factor into their initial cost comparisons. Do you have any stories where mass timber, like risk mitigation, saved a project from a disaster?
Mother Nature remains undefeated.
Always.
Right? So certainly, water is the arch rival, right? Of sitting water. I'm going to say sitting water. Mass timber is pretty resilient in the way it's manufactured. Uh, in the current manufacturing atmosphere, it's a pretty solid product. And there have been studies done on how much water soaks into mass timber if it sits on for a period of time, so on and so forth. We have moisture mitigation strategies we put in place. Um, did I mention that Mother Nature remains undefeated? Because there's always going to be a way, right? Water finds its own path. There's much mitigation as possible. There are certainly sealers, there are moisture membranes, but as long as you're not allowing it to sit and giving it a place to escape and dry out, you're good during the process until you can get a roof on top of it or the next floor above it. Uh, that being said, fortunately, there's a lot of great products out there that help with that. And as we speak, there are new products being designed and invented as we go. We're researching as much as we can. Um, but we have the project in place. We have the mitigation strategy in place. Squeegees, leaf blowers, brooms, air dryers if necessary. I just want to keep the sitting water off it. Snow is a whole nother animal, right? So you're planning for snow. There's a snow strategy. What happens if? One of the things that I think mass timber helps with is that you can schedule, and it is not a. You have the product on site. You have the product ready to go, just in case. We just did a installation for the Pennsylvania State Police Academy. Wasn't so much a moisture thing; it was a high wind. So we were swinging panels in place the first couple of days, and we had to be pulled off site because the winds are reaching 25 miles an hour, and you don't want those panels moving around in the wind. But after that, the wind died down. The next couple of days, we went so fast that the GC actually called us and said, "Hey, can you guys slow down? Because our steel can't catch up." It was a 3-story building, very long building, beautiful building. So the concept was it's a steel structure. It's a hybrid. We put in CLT panels on top of it. And as we get halfway down the line, steel comes back and starts putting steel on top of our floors. And then we leapfrog till we get the 3 floors done. We had those meetings early and often, letting them know that we're going to be, if they don't get in front of us, pretty far ahead. We're going to be crawling up their shorts for a better time. And that happened, right? He called and said, "Hey, you guys are going too fast. We can't keep up." So it's schedulable, right? There's some predictability to that. Um, Good luck with predictability in the construction industry as a whole. Um, the moisture remains to be a challenge. I don't have a silver bullet for that. And I don't know that anyone does yet. When they do, they will be very wealthy, and they'll probably on an island somewhere. Um, but until that time, we put moisture mitigation strategies in place. What are we going to do if, right? Just like again, military reference. What's the mission? What's the exit strategy? And what are all the factors that can, apply to this and that we need to be aware of? So
We were talking on like the weather thread, right? And how we move mass timber in that world. But you did talk about something that I wanted to unpack a little bit. And that was like, you guys are moving super fast. And one of the big selling points or talking points rather that I hear is like mass timber is so fast it can save you on schedule, yada yada. But
yep,
that's only true if everybody else that's working on the building can also match that pace. So what do you do? How are you advising GC, other people that are working on the project to help like make this speed factor actually realizable? Because, if you guys are laying a floor a day or whatever, but it takes the steel guys a week to catch up or whatever it is, then you're not really saving any time or speed because everybody else is still working at the same pace. So like what do the conversations look like on your end around that topic?
that's a really really good question. I call that question the big but, right? You can say mass timber is faster all day long, but when you get to the project and it isn't as fast, and you can see, yeah, mass timber was cool, but wasn't as fast as they said it was. Okay, let's unpack that, right? Why wasn't it as fast? Was it because we anticipated 5 trucks showing up a day, but right, but the cement truck came in the middle of the day and blocked that one alleyway to pour some sludge, and it took an hour, and it reduced that? Or a trade in front of us didn't move as fast as they could have, and it delayed it. So it's taken it as a whole. We try to avoid or at least mitigate or address those in our collaborative meetings up front when there's a handoff, when we're talking to the PMs. What are you going to do if? How is transportation going to look? What the logistics going to look like? Who's that point of contact if we run into a sticker and somebody's slow ahead of us? Um, but that's a great point. It has to work as a system. If it's as a standalone, we don't want our cranes twiddling their thumbs waiting for a truck to get out of the way so that we can start unloading a trailer that we didn't know was going to be blocked. So those are great questions, and we try to have as much as those conversations up front as we can. We actually put out a process sheet uh, and guide, if you will, that we'll share with you guys on here's what this is going to look like. Here's how this show flows. Here's what's going to be a speed bump. Here's what's going to help it move faster. On the Princeton site, one of the project managers mentioned to me when I said what surprised you and what didn't. He mentioned how quickly we could get the work done, that his trades could come in much faster to finish floors out. That was also a challenge to him because heretofore, when there's a steel pan and concrete, the next trades coming in feel that there's going to be a week, 2 weeks before that gets done, before the concrete cures. If it's cold weather, maybe a week and a half because they got to heat it, so on and so forth. Well, if we put 10,000 square of flooring down in a day and his trades can come in next day, he's calling them up and say, okay, I'm ready for you. And they're saying, wait a minute, I scheduled another job for a week. I didn't think I was going to be back in that quickly. So that was an adjustment that the PM had to understand, that his trades could get in earlier. So again, you have both sides of that coin, right? It can be much faster. That can almost be a detriment if you're not prepared for it.
Earlier, you were talking about how shorter construction timelines can mean less disruption to the neighbors and the surrounding neighborhood. How do you help clients understand that it's a soft benefit? It's a little bit under the radar. I mean, and turn that into kind of a hard financial value.
Yeah, that's a hard one to do. It's a hard one to do. Um, it's the same as it being quieter,
Mhm.
right? Um, it's the same as the beauty of mass timber, the biophilic factor, if you will. It is absolutely real. It's absolutely palpable. But to monetize it, um, again, is how important is that to the specific project, right? If it's a project out in the middle of nowhere and it's a cabin, that disruption may not be a factor at all. If it's a new wing to a hospital, that's a huge factor. Um, it's less disruptive. You're in there and out quick. You're not creating a lot of dust, a lot of debris. You're using less vehicles, so the doctors and patients can still park in the parking lot and not have to search like crazy for a spot. You're up and running faster. In the case of multifamily, you know, it's no surprise you get heads in beds quicker, right? Earning more rent. But the disruption to existing tenants, like in the ADM project, his tenants were still in the floors below while mass timber was being built on top. That's huge. If he doesn't have to take them out and pay for their hotel rooms or whatever the case may be while the construction's going on, that's a huge benefit. So, yeah,
No,
go ahead.
but it is. I mean, you're not cracking off nail guns every 5 seconds, and, I mean, I wonder if it's one of those things where that you don't realize it until you do it, and then it's a long-term play where that developer, that owner comes back to you and says, "Wow, you blew me away. All of the neighborhood didn't even know what was going on." I mean, I've heard of many stories where you can pack these projects into a tiny little alley where it just wouldn't have been able to happen with a large crew. I mean, the serious amount of, like, labor power, you're cutting that way down, and trucks are there just isn't as much on site.
Exactly. It's and again, if I'm putting myself in the shoes of a project manager on site, one of the banes of existence is coordinating all these trades and communicating with all the people and ensuring that they understand what the protocols are and what the next steps are. And if you can reduce that line of communication and focus it uh, on a smaller crew, on a smaller, efficient, agile crew and team that's working with a modularized, I mean, that may be a new word, a system, a component that fits into this. Um, I feel that it makes it much more manageable and much less headache and would help them sleep a little better at night. Um, knowing that I hope this guy got the communication message. I hope this guy got the message. Well, if it's a tighter knit team, they got the message.
Yeah, no, that's a good summation. And so we talked a lot about the construction component of mass timber and the benefits it can offer on the construction side. And the people that are paying for these buildings, they certainly care about that, right? But you also have people that are going to turn and burn and sell these buildings, but also people that are going to, hold them for decades or who knows how long. Is
Yeah.
there a part or a component of mass timber that speaks to like the ongoing financial advantages versus say concrete, steel, stick frame, et cetera, that's like past the construction standpoint that would be a benefit to the people that are paying for these buildings?
Yeah. I'll answer that this way. A gentleman that I was speaking to probably about a year ago talked about mass timber as a repurposable and reusable product, right? We did a incredibly cool project down in DC called the Retail Pavilion at Sycamore and Oak. And this project was designed as a business incubator for the African American community. It's a pavilion that houses about 11 different businesses and is built with mass timber and screws, meant to be in that community for 3 years. That's my understanding. And then taken apart and put into another community to build business there. So it's being repurposed. The executive director of the foundation that funded that project was as bold to answer a question at it was a mass timber show in DC, and someone asked him the life cycle, and he said the life cycle of this building he thought would be 1,000 years. I thought that was pretty aggressive.
Bold.
Certainly no one's going to call him out of it because he'll be long gone before he hedges his bet. Regardless, I mentioned we're from Lancaster County. We have tobacco farms, tobacco barns here that have been around for 300 years, right? So if it's taken care of, it's going to last a long time. But here's a good one for you. Compared to the concrete and steel, a gentleman mentioned he was driving some highway and he saw a concrete structure being torn down. He said it was a massive warehouse. And he said, thinking about mass timber, you can repurpose mass timber. He said that concrete that they're doing is going to go in a landfill somewhere. And, to be true, yes, you can repurpose concrete. You can send it through a grinder and grind it up and repurpose, but you got to do a lot more to it, using a lot more energy to get it to that stage of repurposing. But he was saying it was a massive warehouse that was all going to go in the landfill and be wasted and not be able to be used again. So it's a repurposable product. It's regenerative, as we all know, because they're tree farms. So we're growing more every day. So, but, speaking on the usability, the sustainability of the product as well as the project can certainly be repurposed.
So the benefit to the people that are holding these buildings long term is it mostly in the end of life then, or is there like ongoing operational benefits as well?
On the operations side, I think the jury's still out on that. As you know, it's a relatively new, so the benefits are gonna and Woodworks, I'm sure, has something about the long term value of that. Woodworks.org, a great resource, by the way, for any listeners that don't know of them yet or haven't discovered them. Um, the long term benefits, I think, are going to come in. I'm more curious as a behavioral science wannabe, right, on what the mental benefits of that are going to be. And every time I visit a project that people are in already, an office space or a multifamily, I always ask them, you know, like a psychologist, how's it make you feel, right? How does this make you feel? And I'm getting some pretty powerful answers. They say it's much more comfortable than the last place I was in, and I'll ask them why. Some will give me an answer, and some will say, I can't describe it. I just know that I feel better when I'm here. So again, reiterating, it is palpable. Monetizing it, I'm not sure is going to happen until there's more case studies versus anecdotal.
Well, I was going to say, I think one area that you could quantify it is when you're looking at, from a developer standpoint, like the differentiation in your product, right? So if you have, call it 5 buildings of all, let's just use multifamily. You have 5 multifamily buildings. They're all in the same general area, and they're all of, similar layouts, similar sizes, etc. One rents for $2,000 a month and the other rents for $2,100, and the $2,100 is the mass timber one.
Right.
Why would somebody pay, let's say, an extra $100 to go in and live in the mass timber building? And I think you're starting to see it. Well, I know you're starting to see it because I've done a little bit of studies on it, and I've talked to developers that build it into their pro formas. It's like,
Yep.
you have, in the case of multifamily, it's, if you're looking at 5 different buildings and they're all drywall boxes, maybe the trim one was a little different, versus exposed ceilings, exposed columns, that biophilic response. Like you can't necessarily put it into words, but you feel better, right? And we know through science, it's like, well, that's called the biophilic response, right? Your
Yep.
brain is interacting with the materials around you. And so also this is subjective, but it also just looks better, right? And so like if you have the same buildings, one is just a little bit more expensive to rent or to lease, but it looks better and you want to be there above and beyond the other ones, that's where you can come out with that little bit of a market premium per se. And if you were to talk about office, like there are actual studies where it's like your workers will be X% more productive because of this response. And what does that mean for you? It means more work gets done, more revenue comes in, but also stress levels are lowered, right? Health outcomes are better, which means less healthcare costs, less sick days, right? So I think you can actually start to stack these numbers into like the operational side of things. I don't know, like what's your take on that?
Yeah, you went there, so I'm gonna segue. So I didn't want to go to this. I didn't want to go this subjective, but you went there, so the floodgates are open. Uh, absolutely, absolutely. I was at a function where the developer for the Ascent building talked about it as a differentiator for this. This is the Ascent building in Milwaukee. It was a differentiator for him for tenants. The same holds true for the office project we did. I already mentioned that the civil engineer liked it so much that they moved their headquarters in there. But what I didn't tell you is that the developer actually moved his headquarters in there, and that a competitive developer that was watching this project go on moved their offices in there because it was so beautiful. So there you go. That was the seller for me when I said, man, this is really something when a competitive developer moved their corporate HQ into this building because they couldn't not see themselves being in this mass timber building. So it is a palatable thing. So you mentioned about their health benefits. So it prompted me to think about something. If I'm an HR person for a GC and I'm looking at workers' comp claims and liability, workers on site getting hurt, so on and so forth. If I have 4 or 5 crew members putting mass timber versus 15, 20, 30 trades people doing steel and metal as a probability factor, right? The probability of 5 people getting hurt versus 30 getting hurt, you reduce that greatly. You reduce your liability, if you will, by 20, 25 people that could make a mistake and smash their finger, um, cut it on something, trip over things, fall down the stairs. So you can break it down to as much minutia as you want. But as an HR person, if I'm looking at that and say, hey, we're going to have 5 crew members versus 35, they're saying, hallelujah, brother. You know what I mean? That's a lot less stress for me. So we talked about the communication side of that. Now on the HR side for liability, workers' comp claims, something drastic could happen on site. You're reducing that. Vehicle accidents, because there's not 30 vehicles, there's now 4. So, I can break it down as far as you want to, but again, the holistic approach, I can't stress that enough. What are all the factors that are the deducts that you can remove this project to make that net at the end? And is this the better option instead of just looking at, one trick pony?
Well, because I'll tell you what, nobody wants to call OSHA in for an injury. That's the last person you want to be calling, and so it just rings true. I'm glad you talked about some of the real world cases about developers moving in because of just this new beauty that mass timber brings. Another incredibly big real world situation where that happened was in Denver with the Heinz development with their T3. And if people don't know the T3, they have, I lost count at like 27. I think they've built 20. I think 5, 6, 7 are in and under construction. it's about, they're 250,000 square foot, and this is just the T3 in Denver, 6 stories. And what happened was, before the office was up, was even, excuse me, the project was done, Excel Energy, which is, the monopoly in that area of like the 3 or 4 states that runs all of the energy, leased the entire structure up. But here's the kicker: a year before their current headquarters lease expired, they're like, we need to jump in this. So they're moving their entire headquarters to the T3 Rhino, which is a neighborhood in Denver, and they're moving in right now. And a cool side story: we actually get a small kind of a walkthrough of the T3 coming up at the Denver Mass Timber Group Summit in August. So we got to see it 2 years ago under construction, and now we get to go back and see what it looks like with Excel as, a tenant there. So this stuff is just happening behind the scenes. I've never heard of somebody separating a lease and still paying their old lease just to get into a project. So that, I thought that was pretty cool. That we got one more question to kind of tease a couple things out. Let's say you got like an elevator ride. You got a skeptical chief financial officer or a developer who's comparing mass timber to steel or concrete. What do you have, like, a have you considered this type of checklist that changes the conversation from more of like the, "Oh, how much we're gonna spend," to, "No, this is the value that you're gonna gain?"
I don't necessarily have anything pre-prepared for that question, but for the CFO, again, I go back to, there's more factors than just straight up cost comparison, right? Um, and I can list them for him. I can say, how would what are you paying on manpower? How many checks are you writing to how many vendors? Because that can be reduced. What's your project timeline success? Those kind of things. Because there's, depending on how they build and what they build, really depends on how the project progresses, right? Um, so to be fair to the ones that crunch the numbers, um, it's a much longer conversation than an elevator ride, unless it's the Ascent building. See, I'll drop right back in.
Right.
Mhm.
Soon to be taken.
Because then I can just take him out the elevator and show him, and the first thing he's going to do, he's going to reach out, he's going to touch the mass timber, because that's what everybody does. They reach out and they touch it first, and then typically the next words come out of their mouth is, "Oh my God, this is beautiful." Yes, yes, it is. Um, so yeah, it's I think it's a longer conversation than an elevator ride. To be honest, and to be fair to the CFOs of the world. Um, but the predictability of it all, the bane of existence to a lot of companies and special financial officers is the non-predictability. What are we going to run into on this project? It's going to throw us for a ride, and we're going to lose 10, 15, 20, 100 grand because we didn't see it coming down the pike. Well, if you can de-risk, that would be the conversation I would have for them. Mass timber has a lot of de-risks to it. Um, a lot of risk management items built into it already, that you don't necessarily find in a traditional construction methodology.
Yep. Well, that's a great and honest answer. Um, but earlier in the conversation, you mentioned like a couple resources that you and your team have put together, like these checklists, if you will, to make sure that people are hitting on the considerations that we talked about throughout this conversation. And so we'll link those down below for anybody that's interested. And so, like for architects, et cetera. And I know you guys had your structural guys involved with this. So it's like if somebody is listening,
Yeah.
so wants to make sure that they're taking your advice and package it up nice and easy, there's a link for that down below. Um,
Yeah, and it will show, the digital twin model that we do, so what it's gonna look like. So we can look at where the MEPs are gonna be, we can look at where the chasers are gonna go, so there's no surprises. Once again, the de-risk. The engineering, we have engineering in-house, so we can optimize the grid. So those kind of items to consider, so that the architects aren't drawing it 3 and 4 times, because it should be considered as a design build process. We'll walk alongside and say, you could do this and save this. You can do this and put a value engineer right from the get-go instead of coming back to it later on. So correct.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for having this conversation with us, Scott. We're excited to see you guys back down in Denver for the third year of the conference.
Looking forward to it.
I know Nick has brought out some special brews with your name on it, and so they'll be waiting for you when you check in. And if he didn't know that, he does now. The last question that I have for you is like, what's next for Quality? Like, what are you guys doing? What are you excited about? Is there a certain type of project you guys are chasing? Like, what's the future look like for you guys?
Yeah, we're very, very excited. We've seen a lot of activity in the Northeast, which is awesome. We operate mostly east of the Mississippi, up and down the East Coast. So we're seeing a lot of projects happening in the Northeast, and I can't really pinpoint a specific type of project because we're doing everything from international airports to train stations to a lot of university work. We're very strong in the university vertical, colleges and academies, so on and so forth. We're seeing some fun projects as well. I can't really share, but I would call them fun. No, just some fun ones. A lot of outdoor projects that are like, oh, that's pretty cool. I can see that happening. But we do have, like I said, a international airport, a train station. We just need to find an automotive dealership, and we'll have trains, planes, and automobiles. So if anyone out there has any architects out there listening, you got a good automotive you want to throw a mass timber to, call me. But we're really excited. Our team is expanded. We have multiple engineers in-house. We have design in-house. We have just brought on board a new marketing coordinator because we're getting a lot of inquiries. Our estimating is beefed up. We're poised, and we don't see it slowing down anytime soon. The revolution is real. It is a revolution, and it is real, and people are grasping the concept. I've been the evangelizer for the last 2 years, and we're seeing the fruits of that greatly with people understanding the benefits of mass timber.
Yeah, that's a great place to end it. Well, thank you for coming on, Scott. We appreciated the chat, and we'll be seeing you in Denver.
Gentlemen, really appreciate your time. Thank you, and have some tequila ready for me.
You got it. You know how we like to do it.
Yeah, I know. You guys rock.
Cheers.